Good day all and welcome to the Northwest Territories Tourism AGM. And thank you Donna Lee and NWTT for the invitation to speak again at this event. Congratulations on being able to have an in-person gathering for the first time in 3 years. There is not much about COVID-19 that I would think of as positive, but it has broken down some barriers and distance and helped us to find new ways to stay close, even if we can't be physically together. For me today, as a result of being in the midst of our capital planning legislative assembly session, I cannot be physically with you, but I am very pleased to not miss out on this opportunity to speak to you virtually. For the first time since I've had the privilege to hold this portfolio, I am pleased to be able to use this opportunity to focus not predominantly on relief and recovery from the pandemic, but with our sights truly set to the future. That said, I do know that the post-pandemic recovery is not over, and that recoveries that we've already seen have not been even across regions or even within segments of the same industry. So I will still touch briefly on some of the programs and services that are and have been available to help spur recovery and speak to some of that recovery within the tourism industry. But first, I would like to tell you a couple of stories. Last summer, when I was on a regional tour with the MLA for the SAW, we attended a government meeting in Delaney, where we had the very good fortune to be there at the same time as a community fish camp was being held just a bit further down Great Bear Lake. When asked if we had time to go for lunch, there really was only one answer. First, we offered the lake a small amount of tobacco. It was a simple ceremony, but it started our journey in a unique and memorable way. We spent the afternoon at the fish camp, where we had the chance to try scraping a moose hide, and I think this was much to the laughing delight of those who were trying to teach me. We also watched as elders filleted monster-sized trout. It was the most incredible thing to witness. They were so skilled, and I was mesmerized watching as these fish were transformed and then ready to be hung on a wood rack built over a fire for drying. We capped it off with a feast. Tables were set up overlooking the lake, and fish was cooked many different ways over outdoor grills, all alongside warm heaping piles of bannock. It was a meal I will never forget. The opportunity to immerse myself for the day in the cultural activities of Delaney's community was truly an honor. And the idea of capturing this type of experience as a tourism product is one that must come from the community themselves. But it's a kind of opportunity and the kind of trend that we are hearing a lot about. My other story is from this summer. Assembly's Caucus was holding our annual meetings at Frontier Lodge just outside of Litzel Cay. The lodge, of course, recently having been purchased by Litzel Cay Dene First Nation. One afternoon, I climbed the hill over which Litzel Cay is built, and I have to tell you, I felt like I was looking out over a vast, lost ocean. It was, of course, Great Slave Lake, but there was not a boat, not a building, not a person in sight. Only water, cliffs, rocks, and sky for as far as I could see. The feeling was truly incredible. Another afternoon, we went out fishing. I have a confession. I don't really fish. I generally rely on my spouse to bring home fish from Prelude Lake. But again, there was no saying no to this. So first we pulled into a small bay to watch as a muskox was chewing on some reeds at the edge of the water. And then we dropped our lines, and lo and behold, there was a tug. Fish on. I reeled and pulled it in. Eventually, I pulled up the biggest trout that I have ever seen. With that initial excitement past, we put the line in again, and I expected to spend a quiet afternoon on the lake. But moments later, another tug. And so on it went for the next 2 hours, until we finally joined up with the larger group for an incredible shore lunch, with appies served on spruce boughs and fish cooked in many different ways. Either one of these experiences would be bucket list level trips for many people from Canada and beyond. They are exclusive in feel, and they are authentic. In Delaney, it was truly good fortune to be at the right place to participate in a modern expression of such a traditional event. In Litzel Cay, the Litzel Cay Dene First Nation are now the owners of this incredible tourism product. And I learned that they used the downtime of COVID to do what would have been years of renovations and packed that into that period of time. At the beginning of October, I attended a meeting of the Canadian Council of Tourism Ministers. Two of the strongest themes presented for predicted industry growth were around Indigenous cultural experiences and opportunities for sustainable or regenerative tourism. Other jurisdictions are trying to think about how or where to create these kinds of products. What we realized is that authentic experiences and sustainable tourism is a big part of what we already have here in the Northwest Territories. Our challenges are to see the value in these opportunities that surround us, and then to connect those looking for it to the experiences that exist throughout the North, while encouraging and supporting prospective operators so that they have the necessary commercial infrastructure and business setup to deliver. I feel confident that we can collectively succeed. One of the reasons I feel confident is because of the way that we all worked together to get through the pandemic. Since the onset of COVID-19 in 2020, government-funded supports and programs for tourism in the Northwest Territories have exceeded $13 million. Significant additional funds came from the Department of Finance, working closely with the Federal Department of Transportation to ensure supports for the North airline industry, which I know many of you rely on. What did all that look like? Well, first, with the help of the federal government, the Northern Business Relief Fund was almost immediately expanded to address the very specific needs of our territory's tourism sector. Meanwhile, the Department of Finance was working alongside Federal Department of Transport to ensure appropriate flexibility to support the airline industry. A quick aside, I know there are still challenges in the air industry that are disproportionately affecting rural and remote regions. This was also a topic of conversation at the meeting of the tourism ministers, and it is one on which I assure you I am going to continue to advocate to our counterparts in the federal government and to industry. As the pandemic continued, ITI staff worked internally and with partners like BDIC and Community Futures organizations to adjust the terms and capacities of our programs and services in order to meet the challenges as we were finding them. In addition to direct funding supports, our government waived tourism insurance requirements and licensing fees as another means of short-term relief. Two key programs, the Pandemic Relief Extension Program, or PREP, for tourism operators, and the Supplemental for Tourism Accommodation Relief, or STAR, for program or accommodation providers, were both introduced to help cover costs, maintain staff, and keep infrastructure and investments intact. Under the Growth and Recovery by Investing in Tourism, or GRIT Fund, many of you upgraded and pivoted your operations and services. $3 million was invested under GRIT in tourism initiatives across the territory. These three programs would not have been successful without the tourism industry themselves making such positive and thoughtful use of them. Incredibly, the number of tourism license holders in the Northwest Territories has dropped by only 2 licenses since 2019. Together, we have worked and invested with focus and dedication to ensure that the Northwest Territories tourism industry could make it to the point where we are today. Ready to get back to doing what we all do best, and I believe ready to take advantage of the renewed focus on tourism, and in particular to opportunities in tourism that we have in such abundance. This way, we will not only be recovering, but thriving. In the coming weeks, we will once again be calling for funding applications under the Tourism Product Diversification and Marketing Program, as well as for the Community Tourism Initiative contribution. At your meeting, ITI's Idea Cafe is backed by popular demand. If you have an idea about how to develop tourism in your community, expand your existing business, or tackle a tourism infrastructure project, and you're wondering how or if ITI can play a role to make it happen, stop in and sit down with one of the tourism staff who will be on hand. And tomorrow will mark a return to in-person training with ITI-sponsored presentations. These familiar elements of your annual event are all part of proven programs, services, and supports that once enabled the Northwest Territories tourism industry to reach record highs before COVID-19. I'll remind you that in the year prior to the pandemic, the Northwest Territories tourism industry realized a record 120,000 visitors to the Northwest Territories, who contributed more than $210 million to our economy. That trend was on the way up. I want us to be back on that upward curve. But more than that, I want the Northwest Territories to be the destination of choice for Indigenous tourism, for sustainable tourism, and for the next potential trend, regenerative tourism. For anyone unfamiliar with that concept, that is tourism that has a positive impact, and that leaves its host location even better than it was. I think this is what we already do. So it's time to show the world who we are and how we do it. Thank you.